did that last week. We had a lot of music last week. You missed that. It was 12:30, I think, or later. Anyway, let's bow our heads. Father in heaven, as we open your word and as we talk about the topic of today, we'd ask that you would give us that insight and that the Holy Spirit would be here. We ask in your precious name, Jesus. Amen. Have you ever wanted to fly? I always wanted to fly ever since I was a little boy. My father took me up. My father wanted to fly. My father took me up in a biplane. I was about 5, 6 years old. And remember, I couldn't see out. And so I got my head up over the top of the biplane. I had this one big helmet on, these kamikaze helmets, big goggles and everything. I was looking over. My mother kept pulling me down because she was scared to death. It was a biplane with 3 of us in the front seat and the pilot was in the back. But I believe that everybody wants to have those wings where they can go to heaven, because we're going to fly from place to place. But I will tell you this, that you're not ready for wings yet. We have to go through a period of where we can develop our character so it'll be more valuable, and so we can live with those that are perfect, those that are sinless. But this is the beginning of a new year. Could it be, and I hope it is, this is the year that Jesus comes? Because if he doesn't come this year, there will be some of us that won't be here next year. We'll be laying in a grave somewhere. But I believe that Jesus could come very, very soon. In fact, let me read you something. Maybe you have never looked at this book, The Last Day Events. It's a book that you ought to all have. It's a book that is filled with information for us that are living today. But sometimes we forget what it says in these books. We forget what it really says. Have you ever heard about labor unions? Just a few minutes ago. But you know what it says in the spirit of prophecy? It says that unions will cause a time of trouble. Let me just read it to you from page 116, just to give you some, so it'll fill your minds. The trade unions will be one of the agencies that will bring upon this earth a time of trouble such as not been since the world began. Then another little statement here. Time is fast coming when the controlling power of the labor unions will be very oppressive. Well, if you've been awake, you notice that the labor unions have been more or less hemorrhaging because they don't have any power. They're losing people to go in south. The jobs are out. But you know what? God never makes a mistake when he gives a vision to the spirit through a woman or through the Bible. I have an article here from Wall Street Journal. And in this journal, which is not spiritual in any way, yet they are fulfilling what prophecy is talking about. For you see in Michigan, you don't know anything about Michigan, you people, most of you never heard of that state, but let me tell you, there are 34,000 daycare centers in Michigan alone. 34,000. And you know what happened to them? They're all unionized now. They have all become unionized because, for the simple reason that since they take welfare patients or welfare kids, they have been automatically become union. And I have the article here. You can look it up for yourself. You can look it up. But it says here that all of these welfare, it uses the word clients that take government aid, have all become unionized because that's the way the government worked it out. And on top of that, there are 14 other states that are doing it. Now, what they're saying in here, in this particular article at the very end, it says, now that labor leaders are Shanghai entrepreneurs, as Mrs. Berry and Mrs. Lort in the government unions because of their claims to receive government aid, who will be next? Grocers? Landlords? And Dr. Blake unionized the doctors, it says. Because doctors do have people that are taking financial aid. How about the grocery store? They take food stamps. Think about our academies and our colleges. Our colleges are all taking the students that don't have all the money they need. Very soon it could close it all down so that we wouldn't have the freedom that we have today. So that's why it's important for us to be awake to what is about to take place. Things are happening very fast, and I would tell you that Jesus is coming soon and that we don't know how it's all going to pan out or how it's all going to work out, but I'll tell you that it is coming soon. But I want to talk to you about wings, angel wings. How many of you ever seen your angel? Any of you ever seen your angel? You haven't? Well, generally the angels look just like everybody else. In fact, there are angels in this room, most likely right now, at least one kind or another. And I will tell you that I have been in churches where I was preaching that if I'd had my back turned, I could have told you when that person came into the room. And it wasn't a good angel that came in with that person. I have felt it. I could feel it as soon as they walked in. I felt the Spirit of God kind of getting pushed down. Now, I don't know if I've seen my angel or not, but I will tell you that if it wasn't my angel, he certainly was acting as an angel. When I was living in Alaska, financially things were terrible. I wondered how I was going to get back to where I needed to go, and I had 2 kids with me, my 2 children. I went to the dock where I was going to get on one of these ferries that goes from Ketchikan all the way to Seattle. I walked in and I says, I want to buy a ticket to Seattle. And as I bought my ticket, I says, when does it come in? It says, well, about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning it'll be here, maybe 5. I says, well, can I sit here? He says, no, you can't. We lock up at 5:30 in the afternoon. And that means that it's 8-10 hours. And I thought, what am I going to do? Well, I don't know where this man came from. And I don't know who he was. I don't know his name to this day. He says, why don't you come to my house and sit? You can sleep I have extra beds. We can feed you, and you can stay at my house until we go to the back. And then I'll come back down when the ferry's open. I said, well, that sounds great. So he took me to his house. I told him I was a vegetarian. He says, that's no problem with me. We'll have some vegetarian food for you. And he says, and now your children, they can go and take their nap, and we'll wake you up around 4 or 5 o'clock. I just was getting into my room. The phone rang. The ferry had arrived at 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock. If I'd taken a hotel, I would have missed it. And he took me back down, and we got on the ferry. I don't know if that man was an angel, but he sure acted like an angel to me. And I thanked him. You see, we don't know what the angels are going to be doing and what they look like. In 1994, in Ethiopia, we had a problem. Ethiopia has a lot of people that don't know about Jesus Christ. And in 1994, as the people were in the union office, they were having their local meeting, a man calls on the phone, he says, or sent a messenger rather, not by phone, he says, I need a pastor to come to my village or my city to tell me and baptize us. Well, the union men and everybody looked around and says, we don't have anybody who works in that area. There's no Adventists over there. There can't be any. This guy must be mistaken. They said, but we'll send a pastor there. So the pastor, yes.
You said union. Is that the labor union?
No, this was a conference union. Very good. But anyway, so they went and they got there and they met the chief or the head man of that area, and he said, I want to be baptized. He says, I've got all these people here that want to be baptized. He says, oh, we can't baptize you until we teach you and instruct you on what the Bible says and what we believe. Oh, he says, we've been instructed everything. In fact, an angel's been here every day teaching us all. And they says, well, let me examine. They brought the people in, and they brought a number of people in, and they've been questioning them, and they all knew the doctrine better than he did, or as well as he did. He says, then we'll baptize you. And they baptized, and that's how the work started in that city. You see, we don't know what the angels are doing. The angels are busy working. This is why it says they are ministering spirits to come down to help us to better understand God's plan. I'll tell you, when I read about the angels camping around about us, we sometimes don't realize how many times we've been protected from evil. I took my children for a camping trip, my 2 boys and my girl, and we went for a camping trip. I lived in Southern California, but I thought, well, it'd be fun during Christmas break or whatever break it was. It was raining, and we went down to SeaWorld and went around San Diego, and it still was raining. And so we set up the tent. And we got in the tent, and it rained so hard the tent caved in. I mean, the water was terrible. We were all pretty wet. I said, well, let's go on down farther. Got to Mexico, and we went on down into Mexico, went down to Ensenada. And it was still cold. And so my kids and I said, well, we'll camp out here. It's Friday afternoon, Thursday evening. I think it was Thursday. And I said, we'll camp here. Well, we didn't set up the tent. We just decided to sleep. And I put up the sleeping bags, and my 2 daughters said, I'm not sleeping out on the ground, Dad. I'm not sleeping out here. I'm sleeping in the car. Well, the girls got in the car, and my son, he was about 14 then, 12, 14. He says, I'm not sleeping out here either, Dad. I'm getting in the car. So all 3 of my kids were in. So they put all the suitcases about as close as, well, actually closer than this front pew here. They put their suitcases out there so they could have room in the car, because it was a dinky little car, a Nissan. It was a little one. They're little. But anyway, I prayed all night long. I felt very uncomfortable there. I was praying and sleeping and praying. But I did sleep tonight. When we got up in the morning, my kid said, hey, Dad, our suitcases are gone. Oh, we looked around, and they looked way down in a canyon. There was all the suitcases flopped open. And my kids had put the old rags in the suitcase. They'd put them in the good stuff in the car for some reason. They went down and got the suitcases. When I got back home, I was reading the paper, and it says, to tourists that have been in Mexico, generally there were some thieves that will come in this area, in the very area where they said they'll put a knife to your throat and take all your money. Then I knew about Psalms 34:7. The angel of the Lord encampeth around about you. You have nothing to fear. We have nothing to fear except we follow and let Jesus lead us in the way he wants us to go. But I want to tell you, we are standing in an area today where we're going to have to learn to trust God. Do we know how to trust him? Do we really believe that Jesus is coming soon? Do we really believe what the Bible is teaching us? Or are we just kind of saying, well, it's a good book and it's collecting dust on my shelves? Or do we really believe that Jesus is coming? I want you to turn your Bibles now to Acts chapter 12, because this is my favorite story about angels. I love the story of angels. I've wondered if I have met my angel, because I've been so many times I've seen things happen that didn't just accidentally happen. I was on the way to General Conference in New Orleans. Were you there at General Conference in New Orleans? I stopped and my car gave out. I mean, it was absolutely driving along, all of a sudden the car, I come to a stop sign and it died. And I thought, oh. I tried to push it and it wouldn't push, and my wife tried to push. We couldn't figure out. The cop came by and he screamed at me and hollered at me, get that junk off the road, and all these kind of things. And about that time, a man drove up and says, what's your trouble? I said, I can't get it started. He says, let me help you. And he pushed my car off. He says, but let's push it over here. I have a mechanic that will look at it. And we got to the mechanic, says, but it can't work on it till tomorrow. He says, let me find you a hotel. He found me a hotel. And then he took me out to eat, my wife and I. He didn't allow us to pay for anything, even the hotel. I don't know. This guy says, I'm a recovering alcoholic. I just like to do good for others. I'll tell you, he sure acted like an angel to me. You see, we don't know what God is, who's going to send to help us. But here in the story, we find here that James, the first of the disciples to suffer, and then we find that Peter has been apprehended, and he's put in jail. And we find here in verse 4, or 5 rather, Peter therefore kept in prison, but prayer was made without ceasing of the church unto God for him. When we have serious problems, are we really letting the Lord guide us? Are we praying for our fellow members and our fellow friends? We need to be praying for each other every day. We need that kind of guidance every day. But we find here that in verse 6 it says, when Herod would have brought him forth the same night, Peter was sleeping between two soldiers, bound with two chains, and the keepers before the door kept the prison. Here we have really a serious situation. Peter is in a very deep prison. It's a prison to prevent anybody from escaping. For you remember, they had remembered that Peter once before had been put in prison, and when they went to find him, they found him preaching in the synagogue as God had told him to. And so he wasn't going to let this happen. He was going to make sure that Peter didn't escape out of his hand. And he threatened, he says, you guys, if you let that guy go, you're going to suffer with your lives. You'll die yourselves. Well, we know the story, how that is. Peter has learned to trust God completely. You see, we have nothing to fear when we learn to trust God. We can learn to be that confident, and he was sleeping with peace. He was so sound asleep. I mean, I don't know how he could have slept with chains on both wrists, and chained for a soldier on this side, and a chain to a soldier on that way, and his ankles were chained. He couldn't move. And yet, as he's sleeping, sound asleep, suddenly a bright light shines, and he thinks he's in a dream. And the angel has to actually shake him. Now, I know what it means to have to shake somebody to wake them up. When I was living in California, one night, well, actually it was morning, and I was laying in bed, and the bed began to shake, and I thought my kids, they got up early and were shaking my bed. And I turned, and they weren't there. I looked at the ceiling, my light fixture was going back and forth like that. And I ran up, I got up, I said, it's an earthquake, let's get the kids out. I jumped up and I ran, I got my kids and shook them and got them up. 2 years later, the same thing happened again, but this time I couldn't wake my son. He just, the earthquake was all over before I ever got him out of bed. But Peter was so sound asleep, he had to be shook and pushed around to get him out of there. And as he was out of that prison, it wasn't until the cold breeze hit him in the face that he woke up and he realized that an angel had rescued him. Sometimes we forget how much God cares for us and how much he really loves us. See, angels are sent to minister to us. Not only do they go and teach, but they come and help us. If you've been listening to AWL, Adventist World Radio, you notice that in Adventist radio, there are a lot of things that are happening with angels in that. There have been angels that are coming to people and said, you need to read this book. Angels have been coming to different people in different parts of the world, and they are telling people that Jesus is coming again. It's time to wake up. Story after story is coming to Adventist World Radio about what the angels are doing. This is why we need to be awake and listen to the soon coming, that Jesus is coming soon. But as I look at these stories and I read about them, I wonder, how many times has angels protected me? How many times have angels been close to me? Now, when I started pastoring in 1977, or 1978 actually, I took over for a man by the name of Harold Williams. He was an interim pastor. It was a little tiny church. We had 22 members. I made it 26, I think, with my kids. But Elder Williams was about 95 years old, I believe, at that time. And he told me this story, and he also gave me a tape of the experiences he had with Ellen G. White. He said he was working as a nurse at Santa Elena Sanitarium. And I have been there many times, and Ellen White was living in Elmshaven at that time. And he said that he had many times he'd talked to Ellen White. In fact, his mother had even talked to Ellen White, and they knew Ellen White quite well, evidently. But Elder Williams told me this. He says, I came home my shift late at night from nursing, and he says I had my back turned to the wall, and all of a sudden my room lit up, he said. He turned around, and I lived above the hill looking down at Elmshaven. Now, I don't know exactly how far it was, because I've been there many times, having lived at PUC and been to Elmshaven. But he could see some bright light and some figure. He couldn't see the person, but he could see there was a person talking to Ellen White. And he asked the twins later on, he says, what is Ellen White doing right now? And she's writing a book called Prophets and Kings, if I remember right. I don't remember, but she was writing the book, and the angel was giving her the information. Now, on another time, Ellen White, the children were there in the house in Elmshaven, and there's a stairway. If you go in the front door of Elmshaven, there's a stairway. It goes up and around like this. And as the children were there and the family were there, and they were sitting there, and they didn't pay any attention. They said they saw this handsome, strong-looking, wasn't real tall, but taller than normal, came down the stairway. And they looked at him, and Ellen White came and said, did you see that man that just came down here? That was Gabriel that just came down the stairway. Now, wouldn't you have liked to have been there, and you would have looked at it? But you see, they didn't pay attention. If they had paid more of attention, they might have realized that they had seen an angel. But there have been men also that have seen angels that didn't pay a bit of attention. There's also animals that paid attention. I have realized that there was one wise donkey. He was smarter than the man that was riding him, Balaam. The donkey got out of the way, but Balaam was keep beating the donkey. Then you take Sennacherib. Here he is. He says, God can't do anything. I'm going to take care of you Israelites. And he blasphemed God. And yet that night, something like 185,000 of his soldiers were dead. See, angels have great power. But I want to tell you, we have nothing to fear except we realize that God is with us. If we realize how much he cares for us, we have nothing to be afraid of. I want to tell you, the time of trouble is coming. And we need to know our Bibles like we've never known it in the past. We need to be studying. This is why coming Monday, the 11th of January, I hope that you will come, and many of your friends you can bring to the Bible study on Revelation. It'll be from 7 to 8. And as many of you can get people to come, I hope that you would come on January 11th. We'll have it every Monday night.